Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Mr. Deep Coding channel. Now in last episode we were on the backend side and we worked on the sign up and the login feature. Today we're going to write the client code in order to communicate with our server. We'll first of all write the shared business logic and then integrate that shared code with our Android UI level code and make sure that the client can actually send and receive data from our server. I'm going to divide this into two videos that I will probably publish them simultaneously to avoid making one video and call it Android implementation while that also contains the shared business logic. Alright, so with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing is let's expand this shared module and double click on p.gradle.kts file. As you can see, I've got a couple of things added to get started quickly. First of all, inside this plugins block, you will need to add the plugin for Kotlinx Serialization library. And then if you scroll down right above this source set block, you can add Kotlinx version, coin versions, and Ktor versions. And after that, you can add this dependency block inside the common main block. After that, you can scroll down and inside Android main, add also this dependency block where we have the coin and the Ktor for our Android specific API code, and then lastly inside this iOS main you can add this dependencies block as well. You can also grab this directly from my GitHub repository. The link is in the video description. So after you've done with that, you can now click on sync now. Great, so the build is done. Let me quickly close this. And then we're going to expand this src directory. Also, you need to expand this source sets in order for us to get rid of these classes and files that were created. You can delete that because we don't need that, and then close iOS main and Android main. So the way I'm going to structure our project is as follows. We'll first of all create packages that represent each feature. Then inside each feature package is where we will have data and domain layers packages. Let me create first of all a new directory. So I'll create one directory that I will name auth. This represents our authentication feature. Now inside this package, I'm going to create a new directory that I will call data. Great. Now, especially for the authentication feature, there is no such thing like local authentication, and for that reason I'm not going to divide this data directory into two more directories like local and remote, as we will do with other features, but I will put all the classes and files related to data manipulation directly inside this data directory. So let me first of all create our first Kotlin class file, and I will name this model. Select file and click enter. Great. Now inside this model.kt, I'm going to define all the objects, data classes that represent the kind of data that we will send to our server and the kind of data that we'll receive from our server. And for that, head over to Google Chrome, to our social app Ktor GitHub repository, click on the model package, and then click on auth.kt. We'd like to copy all of this. This is the advantage of working with Ktor. Since it's still the same Kotlin language, we can just copy stuff from our server code directly inside our client code, like I'm going to do here. Now, sign up params and sign in params are not meaningful for our client project. I'm going to rename that as sign up request and sign in request, like so. All of these data classes need to be internal, so let's add the internal keyword. Great. Now let me close this. Next, we are going to create a auth service class that will be responsible for communicating with our server. Now inside this data class, I'm going to create a new Kotlin class file that I will name auth service. Select file and create an internal class auth service. In order for this auth service class to communicate with our server, it will need an HTTP client object from which it will call post and get request method and then communicate with our server. We can directly initialize or create and initialize the HTTP client inside this auth service class, but since that is going to be common to all services of all features that our application will contain, I would rather create that inside another package. So let's first of all close our auth package, and at the root level, at this root package, we're going to create one more directory that I will call common. Now inside this common, I'm going to create another directory I will call data, and inside this data directory we need to create one Kotlin class file that I will call Ktor API. Select file and click enter. Great. Now we need to create an internal abstract class called Ktor API, and it's inside this abstract class that we're going to instantiate and configure our HTTP client object. So declare here a new val client that will initialize to HTTP client. Select this fourth option here, and alright, so from here we need to install content negotiation, and we will use our Kotlin Serialization library. So for that you can call this JSON from our Kotlinx Serialization library, which need a JSON with capital J, this one here, and we'll configure this by setting ignore unknown keys to true. Use alternative names, we'll set that to false. Great. We'll install more features when needed. Now below this, let me add space here. Below this client HTTP object, I'm going to create an extension method to HTTP request builder that I will call endpoint. Now this endpoint need a path, a string path, and inside this endpoint extension method we need to call URL, this URL block here, and we're going to set common URL headers and content type. So we need first of all to call this take from method, which in which we're going to pass our base URL. So for the base URL, I will create a private const val base URL, and since we're still working locally, I will add here the IP address of this computer here. So if you are inside Macintosh, to get the IP address of your computer, you can run this command here, get if add en0, hit enter, and then you can copy this, close, we don't need that anymore. So we'll first of all add this HTTP colon / and then paste your IP address, add the port 8080 and another / like so. Now inside our take from, we're going to call this base URL. You need to import this take from like so. Now we're going to pass the path as the path that we receive here, and lastly we're going to set the content type header as content type this one application.json like so. Great. Now we'll call this endpoint extension method when we need to access a specific endpoint from our server. Now I'm going to close this Ktor API.kt, and we need to extend our auth service with this newly created Ktor API class. Now inside this auth service, I'm going to define two methods to suspend our method. First of all, signup that need an instance of signup request that comes from our model.kt, and it's going to return an auth response like so. And we're going to call client that we've just created from our Ktor API dot post. We call this HTTP post method. Now this will give us an HTTP request builder, and from here we can call our endpoint extension function. We'll set the path to be signup and call setBody to be request, and lastly to convert this HTTP response to HTTP response that we to auth response that we are expecting, you need to call this body function like so. Let me close this. So I'm going to define one more method here that we call sign-in, and this need a request as sign-in request, and it will return auth response as well. Call client.post, set the endpoint to be login, set body to be the request, and lastly you can call body to do the conversion. Great. Let me close this auth service KT. I'm also going to close this common. Now we need to come back inside our auth package. Next, we'd like here to create the auth repository, and for that I'll create one more directory inside our auth package. This is going to be the domain layer, and inside this domain directory I'll create one more directory that I'll call repository like so. Now inside this repository directory is where we need to create auth repository interface. Select interface and hit enter. Great. Now this also needs to be an internal, internal interface auth repository. Now inside this auth repository interface, we're going to define two methods, sign in and sign up. First sign up, and this is going to take a name in form of string, email string as well, and password string. And what's happened, and it's going to return result. We're going to create this result seed class in a moment, and it will be a result of auth result data, and we're going to create also this auth result data in a moment. Great. I'm going to define one more method here, which is sign in, and this will need email and password, and it's also going to return result, not the one from Kotlin, but we're going to create that auth result data like so. Great. And now let's create this result class here. So for that, we'll need to go inside the common package one more time, and we're going to create a new directory that I'll call util. And inside this util directory, we're going to create a Kotlin class file that will name result. Select file and hit enter. Now this is going to be a seed class that we call result, and which will be generic on type T. Now this will need a data that will be of type T, nullable, and will start default value to none, and it will also take a message for the error in case there was an error, like so. Now here I'm going to define two result classes. First of all, the error, which will be generic on type T. This can take a data and also a message. The message will not be nullable, can't be nullable, and this will extend our result like so and pass the data and message. We also the same way define success on type T. This will take a data that is not nullable and it's going to extend the result on type T and pass data like so. Great, our result.kt is done. We need now to import that. You can call now this result from our util package the same way here. Now we can remove this. Great, now we need to create auth result data. Now this auth result data is the domain layer model for this auth result response that auth response data that we have from that we get from our server. So let me close this and close the data package. Inside our domain package, let's close this repository. I'm going to create one more directory that I'll call model, and inside this model package we need to create our auth result data. Select class and hit enter. Now this is going to be a data class, data class auth result data, and it's going to have pretty much the same attribute as our auth response data here. Now especially for this case there's no difference, so I'm going just to grab this from here and paste it here. Now we need a way to map our auth response data to our auth result data, and for that, inside our data directory, I'm going to create a new Kotlin file that I will name mapper, or you can name it mappers if you plan to have more mappers here. Select file and hit enter. So we need to create an internal function, an internal function to our that will be extension function to our auth response data, and we're going to call that to auth result data like so, and this need to return a new instance of auth result data. Return auth result data and pass the ID, name, bio, avatar, a token, follower and following, etc. like so. Our mapper is done. We can close that and also close the model and close auth result data. Now we can import this auth result data like so. Great. The next thing is to have an implementation for our auth repository. For that you can click here. We're going to create to implement the interface, and we'll put this inside our auth and data package here and click OK. Select above method and click OK like so. Great. Now since we don't have any local data source and remote data source classes here, I'm going to make this repository implementation be responsible also for moving our API calls to a background thread. And for that, we'll need a dispatcher object. Now, if you watched my KMM movie series, because I'm not going to explain that one more time, we're going to use the expect actual mechanism of KMM in order for us to provide two different dispatchers, because for Android, we'd like to use a dispatcher IO. And since we don't have that for iOS API code, we'll rather use the default dispatcher. So I'm going to first of all close our auth package Then inside this common package util, now inside this util package of our common package, I'm going to create a new file, a new Kotlin file that I will call dispatcher provider, like so. Select file and hit enter. Great. Now inside this dispatcher provider.kt, we need to have an internal interface dispatcher provider, and from here we're going to have our val IO, which is a coroutine dispatcher, like so. You can have also more coroutine dispatchers if you want. Let's add now, for now, just the main coroutine dispatcher also. Now we need to define an expect function to provide a dispatcher. We're going to define that right below our dispatcher provider interface. So we're going to call that internal expect function provide dispatcher, like so, and this should return a dispatcher provider. Great. Now we'll go back inside Android main and provide an actual implementation of this dispatcher provider. And for that, we create the same package structure because they have to match. So we'll have here common and then util package. And then inside this util package, we'll create a file named the same way as it has here. And we're going to call that dispatcher provider. Select file and hit enter. Now inside this dispatcher provider, we need an internal class that I will call Android dispatcher. This need to implement dispatcher provider and give for the main coroutine dispatcher, we'll use dispatchers. Where is that? Yeah, dispatchers.main, and for the IO we'll use dispatchers.io. Now we can give an actual implementation of our function. So for that, I will define that below our Android dispatcher, and I will call that internal actual, this time, function provide dispatcher. Need to return a dispatcher provider, and we're going to return our Android dispatcher, like so. So we'll do the same inside our iOS main now. Create first a directory that we will call common, and inside that common, going to create util directory. Then inside this util directory, we need to create a dispatcher provider file, like so. So from here we have an internal class iOS dispatcher that will implement our dispatcher provider. For the main coroutine dispatcher, we use dispatchers, like so, .main. But for the IO, we'll use dispatcher.default, since the IO package here doesn't exist. The IO coroutine dispatcher here doesn't exist. Select default, like so. Now we need to provide an actual implementation for our dispatcher provider. Internal, actual function provide dispatcher should return dispatcher provider, and we're going to return our iOS dispatcher, like so. Now we can close these dispatcher provider KT files. Our auth repository, back inside our auth repository implementation, we're going to get an instance of our dispatcher provider. Select interface. So something is going wrong here. So yeah, we need to make this class also internal, yeah, like so. And we'll have also our service object here, auth service. We need an auth service object. Now we are ready to implement this signup method. So let's get rid of this. For our signup method, we're going to return with context. Let's first switch the API call to a background thread. We're going to use dispatcher.io. Let me have a little bit of space here. Great. Now here we need first a try block, and inside this try block, going to create the request as signup request. We'll pass the name, email, and password like so. Then we're going to get our auth response by calling authService.signup and pass the request. Now below that, we're going to check if authResponse.data is equal to null. Then we know that there was an error on our server side. In that case, we're going to return an error result. Select this error from our utils package, and the message will set that to our authResponse.error message. You can force unwrap this because we know that if the authResponse.data is null, the error message will never be null as well. So here, else, we're still getting an error. Oh, right. So let's go back here. We need to set this default to be null, like so. Now else, we're going to return success response, success result. And for our success result, we'll pass the data as authResponse.data.toAuthResult.data, like so. Now, if there was an error, let's have the catch block here. Now, feel free here to provide custom error handling, but me, I'm going to catch whatever exception is thrown. So I will have exception from Kotlin, like so. And in case of an error, I'm going to return error result. And here the message, I will say, oops, we could not send your request. Try later, like so. Great, so I think this signup method is done. We'll do the same for our sign-in. Return with context dispatcher.io. Let me just copy this. I'm going to change a couple of things. You can paste that here. First, we need to create a sign-in request. We can't pass the name. Call sign-in instead of sign-up. Then the rest is the same. We need to surround that with a try catch. Catch error exception. So, and we'll return here the same result.error. Great, so I think we're done with this sign-in method as well. Let's go back here and close iOS main as well as Android main. Now next, we need to add use cases, a sign-up use case and sign-in use case. Let me first of all close all of these. Close common. Go back inside our auth package, and inside domain, we're going to create one more package or one more directory that we call use case. Now inside this use case, we're going to create a Kotlin file class that will name signup use case. Select class and hit enter. This needs to be a coin component, that way we can inject our repository directly. Let's create a repository here. Let's inject our auth repository. select add the interface instead by inject, and you can now import this inject from coin. Now below we need to override the operator invoke function. Suspend operator function invoke. Now this will take an email, a name, and a password, and is going to return result as auth result data, like so. Let me close this, add a little bit of space. Great. Now inside this invoke function, I'm not going to do any feed any feed custom validation here. Feel free to add feed validators, custom classes to check if the email is correct, the name is correct, etc. So I'm just going to add a basic validation here for our email name and password field. First of all, I'm going to check if the name is blank or our name dot length is less than 3 characters. In that case, I need to return an error result, and the message I will set that to invalid name. Great. Now I will do the validation for the email. Now check if email is blank or this @ sign is not inside our email. In that case, I need also to return a result error, and the message will set that to invalid email. Lastly, we're going to validate the password. If password is blank or password dot length is less than 4, we'll return an error result, and the message will be invalid password or too short, like so. Now at this point we need just to return repository dot signup and pass in the name, email, and password. Great. Now we need to do the same for our sign-in use case. Create one more Kotlin class file. Let's name that sign-in use case. Make that coin component, private var repository, auth repository by inject, suspend operator function invoke. This will take just the email and the password. It's going to return a result of auth result data. So I will copy this and paste that here, like so. We don't pass the name for our sign-in and replace this with sign-in instead. Great. Our sign-in use case is done. Let me close this. Next, we're going to set up the dependency injection modules, and for that we need to go inside our common package. Not inside our common package. Let's just create a package directory that we call the I at the root package. Now inside this the I package, I'll create a new Kotlin class file that I will name shared modules. select file and hit enter. We'll first of all add a private val auth module, call module from coin DSL, and from here we need to have a single instance of our auth repository. Auth repository implementation, and for the dispatcher you can get call this get here because we're going to provide that in a moment. And this is a single of our auth repository interface, this one. For our auth service, we need just to provide we need to construct an instance each time it's needed, and we're going to call our auth service like so. For our sign up use case, we're also going to call factory get, what's get, sign up use case. So we do the same for our sign in use case. Now below this auth module, let me close this. I'm going to create one more private val that I will call utility module. And just to keep things organized here, you don't have to do this. Now from here, we can call this factory method and call our provide dispatcher. So lastly, I'm going to have here a function that I will call get shared modules, and this is going to return a new list of our auth modules and utility modules. Now this function is going to be called from our Android app code. Great. Now let me make sure that we haven't forgot anything before we move on to Android. Let me close this shared module. And now we're going to open our Android app module. So I'm going to stop this for now because I need to have a separate video for this shared module, even though I've done all this in the same day. So we're done with this for now, and I hope that I have not forgot anything. And we're going to continue in a moment inside this Android app.